So today we're going to make clay planters with the tripod base. So I've got two examples here, and we're going to try and make little faces in our clay planter. So I'll show you the steps. All right, the first thing we need to do is make a slab that's about a centimeter or a centimeter and a half thick. So I'm just going to use these slats so I have a nice even slab. And before I start, I can already tell where I cut this off the clay, I did not do it very even. So I'm going to take the palm of my hand and I'm just going to pound it out a little bit. And I'll flip it and do it again. All right, so that helps just flatten it out a little bit. And I want to go ahead and give my clay board a little spritz, or you could use a damp sponge. Get all the water off there. We don't want to create slimy, weak clay. So you could give it a wipe like that. So all the clay dust is really harmful to breathe in. So you always want to keep your board a little bit damp. All right, so now I can roll it out. So you can use a pop can. I'm just using an old container of fabric ink. And you're going to wrap it in either a paper towel or a piece of paper. And I'll just put some tape across, and that way it won't stick to your can or your container. All right, so now we've got to create a shape to wrap around. So I'm just taking a piece of regular 8.5 by 11 paper, and I'm going to lay it out in the middle of my project. And I'll take any sort of knife that's not going to cut through my canvas board, or even a pin tool would work. And you would just want to make sure it's nice and straight. So I might even use my slat just to use that as a ruler. And don't push too hard. Okay, and then I'll do the other side. All right, so I've already checked to make sure if this is going to be long enough, so you can put that aside, and you just want to make sure you have a little extra to wrap around your pop can. So what you're going to do is just line it up in the center. And then, so that this clay is a little bit more flexible, I would suggest giving it a little spritz with your spray bottle, or you can just dab it with a damp sponge. You don't want to make it too wet. So you don't want to force the clay. You want to be gentle whenever you're doing something so dramatic. So I'm going to ease that around just gently here, around the cylinder shape. And do the same to the other side. So you should have a little bit extra so you can wrap it over. So that's going to be the shape of our planter. So what we'll need to do is score along this edge and then smooth it out. So I'm gonna take my fork, make sure it's not too dirty. Or actually, this is even better, a kidney rib tool. And I'm going to just score both surfaces, or hashtag both surfaces, so that there's something to grab onto there. And then you can use a little bit of slip, or I'm going to use a wet finger, and then just make sure that's nice and gouged with my scoring. And then you're just going to take your thumb and you're going to pull that across. So you want to make it nice and tight so that it fits around your can firmly. So you don't want a giant bulge here, so if you can, just smooth it down. And then support the clay underneath if it's hanging off your candle a little bit so that it doesn't break. And you're just gonna wanna smooth that out. Ease your can out at this point. And this is how we make the feet. So again, you don't want to force the clay too much. So you're going to take it, I like this side for my top, it just looks a little more even, and this side for my bottom because it's a little bit uglier. So without wrecking my planter, I'll just show you the bottom. So you can see this planter I finished on Friday, so a few days ago. And it's at the leather hard stage, but it's starting to dry out, so it's getting a little lighter in color. This is the bottom. So I smoothed it all out. I put my signature underneath in 2021. And then I want to make something similar here. So again, I'm gonna take a damp sponge, squeeze all the water out, and I'm gonna just gently tap the part that I'm working on, so just the top half. And I'm gonna make my fingers a little damp too, not too slimy. I'm gonna wipe them off on my smock. So you're gonna make a triangle shape with your fingers, and that in turn is going to make the 3 feet. So just gently forming the triangle shape. So sometimes we tend to do a little bit more on one side and a little less on the other. So sometimes I'll just turn it around and make sure my 3 points are pretty equal. Like this. All right, and at this point is when we can smooth and pull. I'm gonna leave these alone because that's gonna become our nice flat feet where we're going to set it on the table or the counter. Shortly. So you can kind of see the 3 equal sides and there's no holes visible. Now on the inside, if you can see, it doesn't look so pretty. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a bead or a little ball on the inside. So I'm gonna take a chunk of clay and I'm just going to roll it in my palms like this. And I can squish it a little bit so it's a little bit more flat. And then we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to hashtag here. And then on the inside, it's a bit deep for me to reach that rib tool in. So I'm going to use a fork and hashtag right on the center. I'll take a wet finger, dab that so the clay is a little more wet. You can use a gob of slip, which is like the glue that holds the clay together. A little tricky in there because it's so far down. But I'm just going to put that little bead into the center and I can smooth it out a little bit or squish it down with my fingers on each side. You can see it's kind of getting squished and squeezed. You can use a wood tool to smooth that out, just so it's a little bit more flat. Now remember, this is going to be filled with soil and a plant. So ultimately, we just want to make sure the water doesn't leak through. It doesn't have to look perfect inside. So I'm just spreading that out along the seams as an extra layer of protection. It's kind of nice sometimes to use a paintbrush whenever you can't reach. So I wetted it a little bit just to make it more flexible, but I don't want it to be slimy. So I'm just gonna wet that because there's some old red clay on that. And I'm going to get rid of the extra water on my smock. And then I'm just going to use that to smooth out the really rough edges and to seal that up a little bit more. That way there's not some areas that have a giant lump and others that are smooth. Just want it to look a little bit better, and most importantly, seal up any holes and reinforce any weak spots. All right, so it doesn't look gorgeous in there, but you can kind of see it's smoothed out. Now you can see this area is still needing some work, as is the inside, which has a giant seam along here. So I'm just going to take a finger and I'm going to pull gently, but I always support the clay from the outside so that we don't have one side end up bulging out. And then I'm going to use this paintbrush again to just smooth that out, or I can use a wood tool and smooth that out there. Some people like to create a coil and add that along the seam. It doesn't look like mine needs that, so I'm gonna leave it. But that's an option if you have a huge divot inside your seam, you can bulk it up with a coil. All right, and I'm just going to try and maintain that circular edge because we kind of lost that a little bit. So ideally, your clay has a pretty even thickness. Now you can use either a sponge that's damp, so you want to squeeze all the water out, and you can go along the sharp edges on the inside and along the top, just to make it a little bit more even and less chunky. So you might find one side seems a little thicker than the other, so you can work the outer edge just to make that more smooth. And you don't want any sharp edges, any extreme sharp edges anywhere. Anywhere that along the seam that looks a little lumpy and bumpy, you can use a finger, you can use a wood tool, you can use a damp sponge, and of course along here as well, damp sponge, finger, wood tool. Now, because the clay is so wet, there's not much I can do right now. So what I'm going to do is let it firm up, get to the leather hard stage, then it's not so floppy and it won't change shape every time I touch it. So I'm going to leave this now for an hour, wrap it in damp cloth and some plastic, and then work on it again soon. All right, so here's one that's all finished and it just needs to be glazed. So I can show you how to do that now.